What's going on, guys? Today I have another very special video for you. We are going to be talking about this stock right here, which is Alibaba. Alibaba has been making absolutely crazy moves over the last week. We have seen days where it has moved up over 10% over the last week, and that is absolutely insane for a stock like Alibaba. And basically, it has earnings here in the next 24 hours that it is going to report. So we are going to take a look at what is expected for that. And then there's been a couple articles that I've seen out there about the bear case for Alibaba and why expectations are kind of so low over the next quarter and even over the next year. Some of these bear cases are predicting that Alibaba will not see a whole lot of movement in the stock price. And personally, I don't really agree with that. So I'm going to give my opinion on it. We're going to take a look at one of these articles and basically dive into the bull case behind a lot of these points that these people are bringing up. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like down below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you hit that sub button. Let's start off by taking a look at Alibaba's chart. We can see here today the stock is down 1.51%, but what's very interesting is this 1% move that we have seen after hours. The stock has moved up in a massive way, and what that tells us is a lot of investors are anticipating positive earnings here to be announced in the next 24 hours, whether it's EPS, revenue, or potentially guidance going forward. I could see China, obviously with some of their restrictions being lifted, they could be announcing positive guidance, a lot of positive outlook going forward, and a lot of investors could be seeing that as a potential catalyst to move the stock up. And that trend continues over the last 5 days. We can see that the stock was all the way down at $68 on last Thursday, and we have a few interesting little spikes up here, which kind of make me think that there are probably some larger investors that are trying to basically build out positions in Alibaba, right? We see a large quick move up here, we see a large quick move up here, and then we have a very large move here, which was pre-market on Tuesday. This was over a 10% move in the stock. The stock went from all the way down here at $71.36 to $78.93. In terms of earnings, Wall Street analysts currently expect Alibaba to report $1.65 per share of EPS and $29.6 billion in revenue. This is compared to last year where they actually announced $1.74 per share of EPS and $31.1 billion in revenue. So obviously China has been hurt over the last year. We have the restrictions from the pandemic. We have tech fines that have come on and been set against Alibaba and some of their competitors. And then we also have the housing market collapse that has happened in China over the last year. So there's been a lot of negative things that have happened to the Chinese economy. So it's no real surprise that their earnings for this year and this quarter are expected to be down compared to last year. What I wanted to spend most of this video talking about is the bear case against Alibaba and basically my opinion on some of these topics. So we're going to take this article, and basically what we have is why Alibaba could slide on upcoming news. So this is talking about their earnings, and then we also have basically don't expect Alibaba to quickly turn a corner. So we're going to go ahead and jump into some of these paragraphs, some of the points that this author brings up, and then basically dissect them and give my opinion on them. First up, we have here basically some discussion on Singles Day growth. So what they're talking about, and I'll just go ahead and read this. Few are expecting Alibaba to set the world on fire with its sales figures for Singles Day 2022. With China's economic slowdown and zero pandemic policy having a severe impact on consumer sentiment in the world's second largest economy, analysts forecast Alibaba's Singles Day sales volume growth to be the weakest on record. So that's very interesting. Again, basically they're saying that there will be growth because they're saying sales volume growth. So they're expecting the sales volume for Singles Day to actually grow year over year, which is surprising with all the things that, again, consumer sentiment in China is at an all-time low. They have a housing market crash, which is absolutely insane. You have like 70% of Chinese citizens' wealth is tied up in real estate. And for that to crash through the floor, obviously that's going to have a huge impact on China and its overall economy. And for there to still be growth with all of that going on top of, zero pandemic policies, on top of fines, for Alibaba and basically the government trying to make the e-commerce space more competitive by fining a lot of these larger players in China. Honestly, to still have growth after all of that, that's still pretty impressive. And the thing is, at the end of the day, I don't think a lot of investors are expecting a huge amount of growth for Singles Day. I don't think that huge move up of 10%. I know there's a lot of articles and a lot of news basically projecting that the 10% move on Tuesday was because of Singles Day. But honestly, I don't think that was it. I think it more had to do with President Xi and Biden actually meeting in China and having a discussion and basically an overall positive feeling about that discussion and the fact that it happened, because that is huge for, again, keeping Alibaba listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And Sales Day was only a few days ago. I wouldn't expect a lot of those figures to be released already and to really be discussed. I'd expect, maybe during this earnings call, Alibaba to actually get into a little bit of how they actually did on Singles Day and, what they're projecting going forward. And in this next paragraph, they jump into even more of that. So basically stating that even if it beats expectations, Alibaba should not be expected to rise. Strong Singles Day growth historically has done very little to move the needle for shares. So that kind of just alludes to my point, right? So they see this 10% move. I don't think that's really based off the expectations that earnings are going to come in. Again, I think it has to do with the US and China relations being seen in a more positive light by a lot of investors. And again, here we have another point that kind of agrees with what I'm stating. So sell-side analysts have upped their respective earnings forecasts. Alibaba may be primed to deliver strong numbers for the September quarter. Still, even if revenue and earnings come in better than expected, it too may fail to give Alibaba shares much of a post-earnings boost. So basically what they're saying is Alibaba could beat on earnings, but that still might not mean a whole lot, because even sell-side analysts, basically analysts that are saying that you should be selling Alibaba stock, have upped their respective earnings, which what that tells me is if sell side people who have a negative outlook for Alibaba stock are, upping their guidance, that means that there is overall a lot of positivity in the business of what is Alibaba, but there isn't a lot of positivity around the overall sentiment from China and Alibaba from that aspect. So again, it just alludes to the fact that a lot of this positive, relationship between China and the US and potentially growing that between Xi and Joe Biden, that is going to move the stock more than anything that earnings, a positive earnings outlook. They would have to have a massive beat to really start moving the stock. It's more about where are they guiding for the future and what is their relationship looking like with the US and with the world in general. So with the stock still on shaky ground as a result of home market headwinds, investors could use any negative aspect of this earnings release as an excuse to sell. What you run into in a lot of these cases where stocks have sold off by 60, 50, 70% is a lot of the market has been priced in. A lot of the negative news has been priced in. There's not a whole lot that can be announced during earnings that's really going to send the stock a whole lot lower. So as long as they come out and they announce, relatively close to expectations, they could even miss slightly. And I don't think investors would really sell off. At this point, you have a lot of investors who have held through potentially delisting of the stock, which is, the worst of the worst thing that could happen for Alibaba and for investors. You have all these tech crackdowns from China, and then you have the Chinese market going through their version of 2008 in the US. So you have all these terrible things that have gone on, and a lot of these investors are still holding, and we're still holding a price of around $70. So overall, I foresee it as being very difficult for any earnings announcement, besides basically the company announcing that they're going bankrupt or something, sending the stock down in a massive way. I think no matter what they report, the stock is relatively going to stay the same, if not have maybe a slight uptick. So I have two more things that I wanted to touch on with this article. The first one up here is about their zero pandemic policy. And what we could see is basically they're talking about the US post-pandemic reopening is just around the corner for China, and saying that it would be, the growth challenges challenges that Alibaba face over the next year could continue. So I don't doubt them on this. I think that over the next year or so, I don't think China is going to go through the same reopening process that the US did. The US kind of started opening up and had a lot of these things coming in place, and there were a lot of catalysts that basically drove the entire market up. Obviously, the Fed was injecting an incredible amount of money and into the market, and that just drove up US stocks in general. And what we've seen, with China is they've been a little bit more slow acting. I would not be surprised that, over the next year, as they reopen, I do think China and Alibaba are going to benefit overall from that. They're going to see a lot higher GDP growth than we've seen over the last year or so. And I think that overall, again, is going to help Alibaba as a business. But are they going to shoot up in the same way that the US did? No. And honestly, you don't really want them to, because the US has seen an incredible amount of inflation from that. And China has seen, some similar amounts of inflation, but nothing to the same scale thus far, as they've kind of taken a slower approach to their pandemic policy and to their monetary policy. And that kind of jumps into this point down here. So the policy pivoting of President Xi Jinping. So obviously there's been a lot of things going on in China. They've fined all these big tech companies. They've also had this zero pandemic policy in place. And the question is Xi Jinping going to pivot well off of a lot of these stances, or is he going to stay behind them? And in his last kind of meeting, he kind of alluded to the fact that he could potentially stick behind a lot of these things. But that was, 2 months ago. And now in the last couple of weeks, we've heard that China is potentially going to lift a lot of their zero pandemic policy. So it kind of shows that Xi Jinping is, intelligent enough to know when he needs to pivot, when he needs to start moving things forward. And I think a lot of that had to do with the election. I think with him securing his third term, I think that was huge for him. And honestly, going forward, I think he's going to focus a lot more on economic growth, because that's going to impact a lot of the more Chinese people and the China economy in general, and help him continue to get reelected and basically become, their president for life. So overall, I think that we're going to see him pivot in a massive way over the next year to 2 years. That's overall going to help Alibaba as a business and China's economy in general. To wrap up, basically, I don't think there's a whole lot that is going to be achieved from this earnings. I think Alibaba will come in with, basically at expectations, maybe a slight miss, maybe a slight beat. I'm not really expecting a huge move from the stock based off what they announced from earnings. I think a lot of the moves this week go back to the meeting between the US and China. I think that obviously sparked a lot of positivity in a lot of investors, seeing that there's still cooperation between the US and China, and potentially, keeping the stock from being delisted. I think that's obviously been a huge concern over the last year. It's a concern that's continued to come up over and over again. And just in the last month or so, we've seen, audits starting to take place. We've seen Biden and Xi Jinping meet. And I think all those things have basically got investors a little bit more positive on Alibaba and on China just in general. So again, I think once we get a lot more of those kind of investor sentiment issues out of the way, with Xi Jinping, the zero pandemic policy, a lot of those things, I think we'll start seeing a lot more money come back into the stock, and then we will really start to focus more on the business and what the business growth is going forward. Personally, I think Alibaba still has a lot of growth in terms of its business. I think there's plenty of room to grow in a market like China, where you have a 3 billion whatever population. So again, that's just all my opinion. I think that there's a lot of potential with Alibaba moving forward, but obviously do your own research, look into the stock. If you like the stock, buy the stock. If you don't like the stock, don't buy the stock. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you drop a like down below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you hit that sub button. And as always, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day.